Again, welcome guys, and thank you for being here. We are going to start a 2-week series. So it'll be the message this week and next week are going to be very, very tightly linked together. And so you don't want to miss next week at the very least. And if you're watching online, of course, you can catch the recording or join us for both of those. But we're going to dig deep this week into reflecting on how some of our past experiences, past things that have happened in our childhood, in previous relationships, in previous marriages in some cases, and all these kinds of things, how these have affected us, how we have, some of these things change the way we think and do things today. We call this baggage, that these things that have affected us that we take with us into the future, and it changes the way we do life with one another, changes our relationship experiences and all these kinds of things. So we're going to talk about identifying some of those things that we all have in different ways, and how those things affect us. Next week, we're going to look at more of the solutions to how to deal with some of those things. And so you don't want to just come this week and then miss next week. That's not going to be any good. So you definitely want to be here next week as well, or watch online if you can. We're going to touch on some of the things, techniques and things to deal with the baggage that we all have tonight, but mainly we'll focus on that next week. So what is this? All of us, our lives are filled with past experiences, right? We all have different things that have happened to us. We've all gone through different experiences in life. We've all had different parents. We've seen different relationships. We've seen, maybe been in different relationships, maybe been in some bad ones we've learned things from, or even been, I don't want to say the word damaged, but hurt. Sometimes we get hurt in these types of relationships. Sometimes we're hurt by parents or authority figures in our life, churches, pastors. All these kinds of different things can happen to us. And as we grow older, they affect how we look at and view life, and how we treat each other, and how we treat our spouses for sure. And they affect everyone, and they affect every aspect of our life, but they especially affect us in our marriages. Psalm 51:5, you don't have to turn, I'll just kind of read this to you. But Psalm 51:5 says, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me." So we have this idea, I think of God's, we're all created in God's image, right? We're knit together in our mother's womb, kind of this beautiful little baby. And then as soon as we are conceived, as soon as we are born into this sinful, broken world, and it starts to affect us in different ways. From a very young age, we are affected by sin. We are affected by the brokenness of the world. Unfortunately, it is the world that we all live in, and we need to be understanding of that. No matter what we do, the world has affected us in some way. It has left its mark on us in some ways, sometimes positive ways, but sin definitely has a negative effect on our lives. So life starts. We're little, we're young. Life starts to happen. Hurts start to happen. People let us down. People change our views about men or women. People change our views as we get older about marriage, about husbands, about wives, about roles, what a wife's supposed to look like, what a husband's supposed to look like. As we get older, we look at our parents, and sometimes we start to develop this baggage. Maybe it's gender baggage. Maybe we have a mother in our life who left us, who didn't care for us, who showed us, horrible things. Maybe cheated on a husband, or wasn't faithful in a marriage. Maybe we look to a father or an uncle or brother who neglected or abused or said hurtful things to us. Or we saw marriages in our life that maybe fell apart or didn't work out. And all of these things, as we get older, they start to affect how we view the world. They become baggage that we take along with us. These hurts sometimes can stick with us as we grow older. Maybe there's some financial baggage that you have. Maybe you grew up in a family with a lot of money. Maybe that affects how you view money in your current relationship. Maybe it's not very important to you. You don't pay too much attention to it. There was always money around when you were a kid, so it should always be around now. Maybe that affects you. Maybe you grew up in a family that didn't have a lot of money. Maybe times were tough. Maybe you went to school and you didn't have all the nicest things or the coolest shoes, and kids made fun of you, and that affects how you want to raise your kids and how you want to save and protect, and money means a lot to you because you don't want that to happen to your kids. It affects us. It starts to change the way we think, the way we deal with all these different things. Maybe there's some relationship baggage. Maybe you've been in a previous relationship. Some of us have been maybe lucky enough to found the woman we loved, and that's the one, and we've been with her ever since, or him or her, since we were younger. But many of us have had previous relationships. Hurts. People have left. People have hurt us. People have mistreated us. People have said things to us. Girlfriends, boyfriends, previous marriages, previous relations. All these things have happened. All these hurts, all these things can change as we get into our current relationship. So all these things we think about, maybe some of those things ring a bell with you. Maybe there's different things in your life that happened. Maybe you didn't have a lot of those things. That's great. But no matter what, we all bring something into our marriage. We bring some kind of baggage, light or heavy. But the interesting thing is you got two people coming together in a marriage, and it's a truckload of bags that gets dumped in a pile together. And it can be heavy, and it can be burdensome, and it can be difficult. And we can carry these things through our relationships for years. It's hard to deal with. It's hard to understand. All this baggage starts to hold us back. It affects how we live. It affects how we do life together. It affects how we raise our kids. It affects all of these things. It leads to insecurities. This baggage that we carry starts to tell us lies about who we are, about what we're capable of, about what we're able to do, about who we are as husbands, as wives, as men and women. It happens to us. And it happened to people throughout the Bible. We're going to look at one example tonight, a guy named Saul in the Old Testament. So if you'd like to turn with me back to 1 Samuel, we'll take a look at some of Saul's insecurities, how they affected his life, and maybe we'll speculate a little bit, maybe some things he could have done to help him through that. So we're going to go to 1 Samuel 10:20. So this was a time, if you're not familiar with the Old Testament or the history of the Israelites, so this was a time after, so we'll give you the 10-second history of the Israelites. They had been freed from slavery in Egypt. We have the Exodus and all this stuff, God's promised land. Generations have gone by. They have established an area that God had given them, this land that God had promised to them. And, God delivers all the enemies into their hands, and they've got this place. But it's not really a kingdom. They don't have a king. They had what was called judges that God set up. Samson was one of them, and Deborah and these other judges that kind of ruled over the tribes and the areas and handled disputes and matters and things like that. Well, the people started to grumble. They saw all these other nations all around them. Then they had all these great kings and armies and all these great things. They were united, and they started to think, well, we want that. We want a king. God didn't want them to have a king. He wanted to be king. But over time, they're grumbling. God grants them this wish or this desire. He says, okay, if you guys want a king, we'll give you a king. So through the prophet Samuel, he chooses this guy named Saul to be the first king of Israel. And this guy Saul, we're going to read these verses here. It comes to a point where he's just about to be brought before all the people and crowned the first king of Israel. God has chosen him. Samuel has told him that he will be chosen here. And so let's read these verses, 1 Samuel 10, 20 through 24. It says, then Samuel brought all the tribes of Israel near. So all the people are out here waiting for this moment to happen. The tribe of Benjamin was taken by Lot. He brought the tribe of Benjamin near by its clans, and the clan of Matrites was taken by Lot, and Saul, the son of Kish, was taken by Lot. So here basically we have, this is the way God is choosing Saul, okay? It was already foretold that Saul was going to be chosen, but this is how they're choosing him. They chose the tribe of the Benjamites, and then they chose this family, and then they chose eventually Saul, the son of Kish. But when they sought him, he could not be found. So they inquired again of the Lord, is there a man still to come? Like, where is this guy? Is there someone else? And the Lord said, behold, he has hidden himself among the baggage. They ran and took him from there. And when he stood among the people, he was taller than any of the people from his shoulders upward. And Samuel said to the people, do you see him whom the Lord has chosen? There is none like him among all the people. And all the people shouted, long live the king. So here we have this guy Saul. Samuel, in an earlier chapter here, he came and said, hey, you're going to be chosen as king. And Saul, his insecurities immediately come out. He starts to tell him, why? I'm nobody. I'm not worthy of that. I'm from the lowest tribe, the smallest family. I've got nothing. I don't know anything. I'm not good enough. And Samuel says, no, you're going to be the king. And you're going to go and do all these great things. And he kind of follows along. And then we come to this moment where he's about to be crowned king. And they're like, okay, Saul, it's you. Hey, where's he at? Anybody see Saul? Oh, he's hiding in the baggage. He's afraid. He doesn't think he's good enough. He doesn't think he's going to be able to do this job. He doesn't think that he's anybody. And it says when he stood up among all the people, he was taller and of stature among all of them. He was broader and he was something to be recognized. And everyone yells, long live the king. His baggage, I don't know, the Bible doesn't specifically say, so we're going to step out into a little bit of speculation here, so take this as you will, okay? Something happened to Saul. Sometime in his life, somebody put him down, something happened, his way his father treated him, somebody told him he was no good. Somewhere along the line, he started to believe the lies that he wasn't worth anything. He wasn't good enough. He wasn't, he was just nobody. And he started to believe these things. And we start to see that here in this passage. We start to see what happens. I'm not good enough. I don't have what it takes. The lies start to consume him. And he starts to struggle. I don't know what happened. God saw something in Saul, though. God knew who he was going to be and what he was capable of. God chose him to do a great thing, but he didn't believe that he could. His insecurities were made obvious. Something happened. So what happened? Saul down the road many years later, we'll skip ahead in 1 Samuel chapter 18. What happens? Saul becomes king, starts to do many great things, starts to drift a little bit away from God, following God's plan. And along comes this guy named David, one of Saul's greatest generals in his army. David's been going around and victory after victory after victory, defeating all the enemies of Saul and uniting the kingdom and bringing in more land and more, all these other things that God has delivered. So this guy David comes up and he's this rising star. He's this great general doing all the work that King Saul has asked him to do. And David comes back from this great victory, and this is what happens. Chapter 18, verses 6 through 9. It says, as they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the woman came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated. Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very angry at this saying, displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they've only ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. David comes back, doing the very things that King Saul asked him to do, victory after victory, being the leader of these troops. And as soon as he comes back into town, everyone's chanting his name, everyone's saying how great he did, and immediately King Saul's insecurities rise to the surface. And instead of congratulating him and welcoming him in and lifting him up of the great things that he has done for the kingdom and for the Israelites and for God, instead he becomes angry inside. He says, I'm not good enough. This guy is better than me. The people like him more. They think that he's better than me. What's going to happen next? He's going to become king. The people are going to like him more than they like me. They're going to give this kingdom's going to end up being given over to him. His insecurities start to come out. And all the baggage that he brought through his life starts to affect him. He gets angry. And from this moment on, his relationship with David will be broken. God removes his favor from King Saul. And he gives the kingdom to David. The very thing that Saul feared happened because of how he acted and because of him not following God. He thought, I'm not good enough. He thought, this guy is better than me. I wonder if Saul knew his baggage, if he knew his weakness, if he knew his insecurity, if he knew that's where he may fall short. I wonder if he knew that, if maybe that would have helped him identify before he went down a path of hatred and anger and jealousy and all these things. I wonder if that would have been the case. It wasn't. He decided that he was going to hate David. Many of us know the rest of this story. They spent years fighting each other. Spent years trying to kill David. Spent years trying to hunt him down because he feared him. Now, the baggage that Saul carried may be different than yours or mine. We all have different things, right? We all have different insecurities. We all have different things that we've brought with us. So many of you probably thinking of some of these things tonight. Many of you might be thinking of the baggage that your husband or wife brought into the relationship. Sometimes it's easier to identify others' baggage than it is to see our own. So how do we handle this? What do we do? What do we do with the baggage that we carry in our marriage? What is the answer? We're going to talk a little bit about some of that tonight. How do we handle it? How do we deal with it? Let's flip forward into the book of Ephesians, Ephesians 4. Paul here writing to Ephesus, and he's encouraging them. These verses aren't specifically written to marriage or a husband or a wife, but they're certainly applicable to our lives and to our relationships with one another. Ephesians 4, verses 1 through 3. Many of you know these verses. They're great. How do we deal with this baggage in our marriage? How do we handle our wife's baggage that she brought into this marriage with us? How do I handle my husband's baggage that he brought into this marriage? I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. We have all been called to something greater. We've all been called to serve and follow our Lord Jesus Christ. We need to walk in a manner that is worthy of that calling. How do we do that? With all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Eager to maintain unity in your marriage. It's the opposite of unity is division. That is not how we handle the baggage that our wife or our husband may have brought into a marriage, the struggles that they have, the things that have affected them, the ways that they view certain situations, the ways that they view men or women, the way that they view marriage, the way that they view parenting, the way that they view, or things that they struggle with, these different things, trusting or other things like that. How do we handle these things? We handle them with patience. It is not in our time that they will be delivered from whatever it is that they struggle with. It is in their time and it is in God's time. The only thing that we can do is to help them eagerly with this idea of unity and peace and patience. Patience being the key word is why I keep saying it over and over again. Patience. We might see, sometimes it's so easy to see the struggles. Oh, I bet you she's doing that because, this happened in her childhood. And we can remind them of that. We can tell them that they're wrong because of that. We can say all of these things. We can tell them. We can see it. It's so obvious to us because maybe that's not the baggage that we have. Maybe it's different. We point it out. We can tell them. It's not really going to help because that's not in unity and that's not in peace and that's not worthy of the manner in which Christ has called us to live. Sometimes we can see this baggage. This was the case, I think with Lisa and I. Lisa and I have been married going on 11 years, and going on 12 years. And it's been a lot of years, good years. And we've been through all kinds of different things. Our lives were very different. Our childhoods were very different. Lisa grew up differently than I did. Lisa grew up with a father who often cheated on his wives. I say wives, there were many relationships that she saw as a kid growing up. She saw her dad not really regarding marriage as anything, or women as anything that was of any importance. So naturally, as we got married and she came into a relationship with me, there was distrust, almost a waiting. Like, is this guy going to do what my dad did? Is this guy going to do what my brothers may have done, or this person, or other people that we look? And we've talked about this, and that was one of the things that we had to work through, and that she's worked through, and that I've worked through, and that one of the things that we brought into the marriage together. It wasn't hard to notice that there was trust struggles in our marriage. I feel like, well, why doesn't she trust me? I didn't do anything to deserve her to not trust me, but other men have. And so that affects how she views those things. Same with me. I grew up, as a teenager, I saw my brother get divorced. I saw my parents get divorced. I saw my sister get divorced. I felt like everybody got divorced. The only other relationship that I had, the only real relationship of any lasting time that I had before Lisa was in and after high school, to a girl who cheated on me with one of my friends and ran off with him. This was my view of relationships. This is the baggage I hauled into our marriage. So naturally, I had to work through some issues myself. If I don't really get close to Lisa, if I never really build a real relationship with her, then I'll never have to deal with anybody leaving me. I'll never have to deal with really feeling bad if something goes wrong, because it's probably going to. Who knows what's going to happen? All these things are in my mind. They're in the back of our heads. They're lies that the enemy uses sin in our life to cause trouble, to weaken us, to rise up insecurities about our spouses, to divide us apart. That's exactly where the enemy wants us to be. He wants us to be divided, and these are that he uses sin of other people that have affected us. He uses sin in our own life to divide our marriages, and that is exactly what we want to avoid. We want to recognize these things. That's what I want to talk about today in small groups. Is I want you to be thinking about this right now. What are some of the things that have happened to you that might be affecting your marriage? Maybe you haven't really thought about that. Maybe there's some things that and again, want to avoid I know all his baggage, I know all her baggage, we want to avoid that, but what have some things that you maybe can deal with or work on? Next week, we're going to talk about some of those specific ways in which God tells us that we can work through those things. Sometimes these things show up over time. Sometimes it's years and years go by, and then all of a sudden you realize that there's something that you have struggled with, something that has affected how you are in this relationship currently in your marriage. 1 Peter 3:7, the first part of this verse says, "Husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way." This goes both ways. This verse was intended specifically to be for husbands, but it goes both ways. If we're living with our spouse in an understanding way, I know one of the biggest breakthroughs in my marriage was when I started to understand what Lisa had been through in her past and what I had realized I had been through in my past and how those things were affecting our relationship now. When I started to just identify those things, if Lisa acted a certain way, I was understanding now instead of angry or put off or offended or whatever it might be, because I understood why she may have acted that way, and we talked about that. And vice versa. She understood some of the things that I had been through, and she understood, maybe why I acted certain ways. Oh, that makes sense now. You brought that baggage into our marriage. I didn't really realize that. I didn't really know that. Now that I know that, it's easier for me to live with you in an understanding way. This is what the Bible's called us to do. So identifying the baggage that we may have is the first step. And we look back to King Saul. I wish that, again, this is completely made up. This isn't in the Bible, but I think that maybe if he would have known where his insecurities or struggles were, he may have gone down a different path. And that's what we hope for each one of us. King Saul brought those insecurities into his kingdom, into his relationship with David, who was a great man, a man after God's own heart. Let's turn back to 1 Samuel 24. We'll kind of see how the story ends. How did David treat King Saul? King Saul, we know, in his insecurities, became very jealous, became very angry, became very envious of David and wanted to kill him. Spent years chasing him down and all these things that I said. So here we come in, 1 Samuel 24. Saul and his army, King Saul and his army, they're chasing David around. And David and some of his troops, some of his loyal guys, and trying to kill him. And they come upon this moment. We'll read a little bit of this. And the men of David said to him, let's go back, 24, verse 1, sorry. I had something different highlighted. Okay. When Saul returned from following the Philistines, we'll start in verse 3. When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi." Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goat rocks. And he came to the sheepfolds by the way, where there was a cave. And Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. And the men of David said to him, "Here is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as you shall seem good to you." Then David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. But afterwards David's heart struck him because he had cut off the corner of Saul's robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed." So David persuaded his men with these words and did not permit them to attack Saul. And Saul rose up and left the cave and went on his way. All the hatred, all the anger that Saul poured out to David, chasing him around, wanting to have him killed, all these things, think of all the arguments and all the exchanges. If you read through this whole story, they have all these back and forth arguments. There's all these times when, Saul's getting angry and throwing spears at David, and finally they end up, going through this whole turmoil. It reminds me of a marriage sometimes. Like, this is how it can end up. We're back and forth, and we're at each other, and, we get angry, and we get jealous, and we get, all these things start to happen. And David comes to this moment where Saul, he's got thousands of men with him. They're all outside. Saul walks into the cave, the very cave that David is hiding in. Saul, of course, doesn't know this. David has this perfect opportunity to strike him down, to give him everything he deserves, to finally put an end to this whole thing, all the pain and chasing and arguments and all these other things, finally put an end to it. And he has this moment to strike. But he says, no, this is one of God's children. This is one of God's anointed. This isn't honoring to God. This isn't honoring to God to strike this man down. I'm going to let God deal with this. I'm not going to take this into my own hands. I will let God handle this in his way, in his time. And he did. Many years later, Saul would die by different means. David would become king. Sometimes we can see the moment to strike in our marriage. Sometimes we can see the weakness of our partner. This is our moment to get them back. This is our moment to show them where they were wrong and how they failed. This is our moment to the knife in the back moment. This is our moment to put them down or say the harsh things or bring up the past and all these other things. But God says, no, live with them in an understanding way. We strive for unity, for peace. We don't do that thing. We let God handle and work out the things that they're working through in His time. We do these things with patience, great patience. I keep saying that. We're called to honor God and honor each other. This is the whole point in everything that we do. It's not up to us. We say this all the time. It's a theme, throughout the marriage ministry. It's not up to us to point out the mistakes and the failures of our spouse. It's up to us to lift them up. It's up to us to carry them through. It's up to us to be understanding. It's up to us to live with them in a way that brings peace in our relationship and in our home. It's up to us to help them through their struggle. That is what we've been called to do. And we understand the struggles that our spouses have. We understand the baggage, and that's something we can talk about tonight in small groups. If you don't feel comfortable talking about it in small groups, talk about it on the way home. Talk about it tonight before you go to bed. Talk about it tomorrow when you have a cup of coffee. Talk about some of these things that you may have brought into the marriage. Some of these things that you hauled out and you brought into the marriage that may have affected, and help your spouse to understand. Tonight as we break into small groups, that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a dive into identifying some of those things, talking about how those things may have affected you. Some of you guys probably have some things, that you've already worked through. Some of you might be working through some things right now. That's fine. We all have something different. Some of us have a lot of baggage. Some of us have very little. But it's all very heavy, and it weighs us down in any way. So how can we start to heal from past hurts? How can we help our spouse through those past hurts? Not how they've hurt us and not all these things, but how can we help our spouses through these things? How can we understand the baggage that they may have brought into the relationship, each of us, and how can we deal with that, each in our own ways? I'm going to take a minute and pray for us, and then we'll break into small groups and enjoy a night together. Dear Father, Lord, it's a blessing to be here and to open your word. David is such a great example in so many ways. Although he had his own struggles, God, we all do. He showed us how to honor you, how to not take an opportunity to put someone down, to hurt somebody, and instead pass that opportunity up. Sometimes just keep our mouths closed. Pray for them. How can we help each other in our marriages? How can we strengthen each other? How can we strive forward with the same mission that we've been called to serve you, Jesus, to serve your kingdom, to serve your mission? How can we do that in a spirit of unity together, not division? Father, I hope that you reveal to us tonight as we talk, as we go about our way, that you will reveal to us how we can identify these things in a healthy and understanding and an honest way, that we may have past experiences, sin in our life and in others' lives that have affected us, that might now be affecting our relationship with our husband or wife, and how we can deal with that, Lord. Help to bring those things to the surface. Give us patience. Let the Spirit produce that fruit in us tonight and always in our marriage. Help us not to look to our timing or what we think should happen or how it should happen, but to look to yours and pray for you to reveal that to our lives. I ask that you be with us, Lord, as we break in our groups tonight, be with our conversation, be with the conversations in the cars on the way home, conversations that happen maybe tomorrow morning, throughout the week. I ask that you just guide those things, Lord. Give us wisdom. Please bless us, God, in all that we do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.